Imagine this. A single Turkish TV drama gets uploaded to YouTube. At first, just a few curious clicks. Then, in a matter of weeks, it explodes into a phenomenon that smashes billions of views, trends in countries halfway across the world, and even gets prime ministers recommending it on national television. That's not fiction. That's exactly what happened with Diriliş Ertuğrul, a series about a tribal leader from the 13th century who laid the foundations for the Ottoman Empire. This wasn't just a show. It became a global tidal wave. In Pakistan, entire families sat down together in lockdown, watching dubbed Urdu episodes night after night. On YouTube alone, one channel hosting Ertuğrul clocked in 10 million subscribers within months. Some episodes broke past 150 million views each, rivaling the biggest Netflix hits. And it didn't stop there. Across South Asia, the Middle East, the Balkans, and even Latin America, audiences were captivated. At the same time, Magnificent Century, another Ottoman-era drama, this time about Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, was shattering records across 50 countries. Over 200 million viewers tuned in to watch court intrigue, palace betrayals, and the sweeping grandeur of one of the world's most powerful rulers. In Greece, Morocco, Spain, and Bangladesh, this drama became dinner-table conversation. In Kosovo, grandmothers could quote entire episodes. So here's the question. How did a string of historical Turkish dramas turn into a global pop culture weapon? How did shows about Ottomans, sultans, warriors, viziers, and queens suddenly compete with the likes of Game of Thrones and Breaking Bad for global attention? The answer is bigger than television. Because what you're watching isn't just scripted drama. It's a carefully woven story of identity, nostalgia, politics, and power. These shows are addictive for a reason. They've been designed to be more than entertainment. They're soft power, cultural diplomacy, and modern myth-making wrapped in sword fights, palace drama, and breathtaking Ottoman costumes. When you watch Ertuğrul strike down his enemies with honor, or when you see Hürrem Sultan rise from concubine to queen in Magnificent Century, you're not just watching history. You're watching a reimagined past that's meant to inspire, to seduce, to pull people into the dream of an Ottoman legacy reborn. And it's working. Turkey is now the third largest exporter of TV dramas in the world, just behind the United States and the United Kingdom. But here's the kicker. These shows aren't just making money. They're reshaping identity, culture, and even politics in countries thousands of miles away. This isn't about binging a show after work. This is about soft power that travels faster than armies and deeper than diplomacy. These Ottoman dramas are doing something empires of the past could only dream of, conquering the world with stories. And that's just the beginning. To understand the rise of Ottoman dramas, you can't ignore the juggernaut that started it all. Diriliş Ertuğrul. At first glance, the concept sounds simple. A historical drama about a man named Ertuğrul Bey, father of Osman Farfar, the founder of the Ottoman Empire. But simplicity was the secret weapon. The show took the story of a nomadic warrior from the 13th century and turned it into a sweeping 5-season epic of honor, betrayal, faith, and destiny. When it first aired in Turkey in 2014, it was already a success. Turkish audiences were drawn in by the mix of medieval battles, family drama, and a sense of pride in their Ottoman roots. But what no one could have predicted was how far this story would travel. By 2019, Ertuğrul was no longer just a Turkish show. It was a global phenomenon. On Netflix, subtitled versions started popping up in dozens of countries. Then, during the COVID lockdowns, it hit another level. Entire families across Pakistan, India, Bangladesh and beyond gathered in their living rooms to binge it together. In some places, it wasn't just a hit. It was practically a movement. In Pakistan, Prime Minister Imran Khan himself publicly recommended the show to his people, calling it a way to teach values, history, and Islamic identity. Suddenly, every household wanted to see what the hype was about. The Urdu-dubbed version on YouTube skyrocketed in views. Within months, the Ertuğrul channel became one of the fastest growing in the world, pulling in over 10 million subscribers. Episodes regularly crossed the 100 million views mark, rivaling music videos by global pop stars. But the numbers tell only half the story. What made Ertuğrul special wasn't just that people watched it, it was that people felt it. In the Middle East, audiences connected with its portrayal of Islamic identity. Brave warriors standing for justice, loyal families bound by faith, villains defeated by honor and patience. In South Asia, it became a cultural bridge, connecting millions of viewers to a Muslim heritage they felt had long been ignored in mainstream media. In the Balkans, where Ottoman history is both remembered and contested, the show became a lightning rod for debate. Some praised it, others criticized it, but everyone was talking about it. Even in Latin America, far from Ottoman history, people couldn't get enough of the show. Subtitled Spanish versions drew millions of views. Brazilian fans called Ertuğrul the Muslim Game of Thrones, and the production itself reflected the ambition. Elaborate sets, carefully researched costumes, and sweeping soundtracks gave the show a cinematic feel. Unlike typical soap operas, this was high-budget storytelling designed to feel like an epic. At the same time, its moral simplicity, the good guys are honorable, the bad guys are treacherous, made it easy to watch across cultures. But here's the real secret. Ertuğrul wasn't just telling the story of a man. It was telling the story of an empire waiting to be born. Every battle, every negotiation, every tribal drama was framed as the first sparks of what would become the Ottoman Empire. That gave the show an almost mythological weight. Viewers weren't just watching history, they were watching destiny. This explains why it resonated so deeply. In a fragmented, uncertain modern world, here was a narrative that promised order, justice, and unity. A tribal leader struggling in the wilderness suddenly felt like a symbol of resilience for people living in countries still struggling with identity, corruption, or instability. And this wasn't lost on Turkey's government. Officials embraced the show, recognizing it as a tool of soft power. Suddenly, Turkish television was doing what diplomacy couldn't, making millions of people around the world feel admiration, loyalty, even nostalgia for a shared Ottoman past. So a simple series about a 13th century warrior became something else entirely. It became a cultural wave, a political talking point, and a global obsession. By the end of its 5-season run, Ertuğrul had pulled in billions of views across dozens of countries. But here's the twist. As big as Ertuğrul was, it wasn't the first Ottoman drama to dominate the world stage. Years earlier, another show had already paved the way, one filled with palace intrigue, forbidden love, and the most powerful sultan in Ottoman history. And that takes us straight to the next chapter. Before Ertuğrul turned Ottoman history into a global Netflix-style epic, Another series had already broken the gates wide open. It was called Muhteşem Yüzyıl, in English, Magnificent Century. And to this day, it remains one of the most controversial, most watched, and most influential dramas Turkey has ever produced. At its core, the series tells the story of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, the longest reigning Ottoman ruler, and his powerful love affair with Hürrem Sultan, the enslaved woman who rose to become his wife, queen, and one of the most influential figures in the empire. But this wasn't a dry retelling of historical dates and battles. It was palace drama. It was power struggles. It was betrayal, love, ambition, and seduction played out in golden halls and candlelit chambers. When it first aired in Turkey in 2011, Magnificent Century caused an uproar. Conservative critics blasted it for showing the Sultan in private moments, drinking wine, spending time with women, appearing vulnerable instead of the flawless warrior king many wanted him to be. Lawsuits were filed. Politicians condemned it. Even President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan said that depicting Suleiman in such a light was disrespectful to Ottoman history. And yet, the more people condemned it, the more audiences tuned in. Millions of Turkish viewers were glued to their screens every week. The drama of the harem, the scheming viziers, the epic campaigns across 3 continents, it was unlike anything else on television. But here's the twist. The controversy at home only fueled its success abroad. As soon as it was exported, Magnificent Century exploded. It spread across Eastern Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and the Balkans like wildfire. Then it leapt into Latin America, where audiences who had never thought about Ottoman history suddenly couldn't get enough of it. In countries like Chile, Argentina, and Mexico, it was beating out local soap operas in ratings. By the time the series ended, it had been broadcast in over 70 countries and watched by an estimated 500 million people worldwide. To put that into perspective, that's 500 million people watching the story of an Ottoman sultan and his love for a concubine turned queen. Why did it hit so hard? Because it combined 2 irresistible forces: historical spectacle, the grandeur of an empire at its peak, with lavish sets, rich costumes, and sweeping battle scenes; human drama, jealousy, romance, betrayal, and ambition, all told in a way that transcended cultural boundaries. For viewers in the Arab world, the harem politics felt familiar, almost like echoes of their own history. For audiences in Latin America, the melodrama matched the emotional intensity of their telenovelas, but with the exotic twist of Ottoman palaces and Turkish landscapes. For Europeans, it was a rare chance to see the empire that had once stood at their gates not as an abstract power, but as flesh and blood people with rivalries, weaknesses, and desires. And just like with Ertuğrul, the series wasn't just entertainment, it became cultural diplomacy. Turkish exports of TV shows skyrocketed after Magnificent Century. Suddenly, Turkish actors and actresses were household names in countries thousands of miles away. Halit Ergenç, who played Suleiman, and Meryem Uzerli, who played Hürrem, became international stars. For Turkey's image abroad, this was massive. Overnight, Istanbul became a dream destination for fans. Tourism agencies offered Magnificent Century tours of Topkapı Palace, the setting of many key scenes. Sales of Ottoman-style jewelry, costumes, and accessories spiked. Even the Turkish language saw a boost in foreign learners. But beyond the glamour and the exports, the series touched something deeper: It reminded viewers that the Ottoman Empire wasn't just a shadow in history books. It was a living, breathing world filled with ambition, intrigue, and choices that shaped continents. And perhaps the most controversial part of all, by focusing on Suleiman's private life, his vulnerabilities, his passions, his mistakes, the show humanized him. To some, that was an insult. To others, it made him more relatable than ever. By the end of its run, Magnificent Century had done what no one thought possible. It made Ottoman history go viral. It showed that a story set in the 16th century could compete with Hollywood blockbusters and dominate primetime television from Istanbul to Buenos Aires. And that's where the domino effect begins, because without Magnificent Century, there may not have been an Ertuğrul. Without Ertuğrul, there may not have been a global Turkish drama wave at all. The Ottoman Empire, long gone, was suddenly alive again in the imaginations of millions. And this was only the beginning. Because, as we'll see, the explosion of Ottoman dramas wasn't just about TV ratings. It was about identity, politics, power, and the question of who gets to tell history. When we think of television shows, we usually think of entertainment, something you put on after work, something to relax to, something to binge watch when you can't sleep. But when it comes to Ottoman history on screen, that's never the full story, because these dramas, from Magnificent Century to Ertuğrul and beyond, have never been just about the past. They've always been about the present. The Ottoman Empire may have collapsed more than a century ago, but in modern Turkey, its shadow still looms large. For some, it's a source of pride, a reminder that their ancestors once ruled 3 continents, commanded vast armies, and stood as a superpower alongside Europe, Persia, and the Ming dynasty of China. For others, it's a burden, a past they see as filled with authoritarian rule, harems, and endless wars. And so, when Ottoman stories are retold on television, they immediately become political tools, whether the creators intend it or not. Take Magnificent Century. As we saw, it was a massive global hit, but in Turkey it triggered a firestorm. Conservative politicians argued that it portrayed Sultan Suleiman, revered as one of the greatest rulers in Ottoman history, as too soft, too indulgent, too human. They wanted the warrior king, not the man behind the throne. They wanted the image of an untouchable leader, not someone making mistakes, falling in love, or hesitating before battle. At one point, President Erdogan himself publicly criticized the show. He told a crowd of supporters that the Sultan had spent 30 years of his life on horseback, not in palace chambers, as the drama suggested. Lawsuits were filed against the producers. Protesters demanded it be taken off air, and yet week after week millions still tuned in. The controversy only made it stronger, and that reveals something important. Ottoman dramas aren't neutral. They shape how people imagine history, and by extension, how they imagine their own identity. Was the empire defined by glory and faith, by decadence and betrayal, by expansion, or by decline? The way you answer those questions shapes not just your view of the past, but also your stance on the present. This became even clearer with Diriliş Ertuğrul. Where Magnificent Century gave us palace intrigue and forbidden love, Ertuğrul gave us something entirely different, a story of pure heroism, faith, and nation-building. Ertuğrul, the father of Osman, founder of the Ottoman dynasty, was depicted as the ultimate Muslim warrior, noble, brave, just, and unwavering in his belief. He was surrounded by enemies, crusaders, Mongols, rival tribes. But he always fought with honor and faith on his side. For millions of viewers in Turkey, this wasn't just a TV show. It was an antidote to what they saw as the corruption of magnificent century. It was about reclaiming the Ottoman story, polishing it, and presenting it as a tale of purity and destiny. The timing couldn't have been more perfect. Ertuğrul began airing in 2014, just as Turkey's politics were shifting into a more openly Ottoman-inspired rhetoric. Politicians spoke of a new Turkey, a nation that would reclaim its historical greatness. The show became part of that narrative. And it worked. The series wasn't just a ratings hit, it became a cultural phenomenon. Schools used it as a teaching tool, politicians praised it, state-backed networks promoted it. Suddenly, Ertuğrul wasn't just a character on TV, he was a national symbol, a reminder that Turkey's identity didn't have to be borrowed from the West. It could be rooted in its own history. But the influence didn't stop at Turkey's borders. In Pakistan, for example, Ertuğrul was embraced at the highest levels. Prime Minister Imran Khan publicly endorsed it, calling on people to watch it for its moral lessons. The show aired on state television, with dubbed versions reaching millions. Overnight, Turkish actors became household names in Pakistan. Social media was flooded with fan pages. Actors from the show were invited as guests of honor. The cultural link between Turkey and Pakistan, already strong, became even stronger. And then there's the Middle East. In countries like Egypt, where Ottoman rule is remembered less fondly, these shows stirred old debates. Was the empire a source of unity or oppression? Were the Ottomans liberators or occupiers? The dramas reopened historical wounds, and in some cases governments even banned them. That's the irony. A TV show about the 13th century could spark debates in parliaments, sermons in mosques, and arguments in cafes. The past was alive again, because the past was never really gone. But maybe the most fascinating part is how these dramas became tools of soft power. While Hollywood sells the American dream through its blockbusters, Turkey began exporting its own dream through Ottoman dramas. Millions of people abroad, from the Balkans to Latin America, began associating Turkey with heroism, grandeur, and faith. It was cultural diplomacy, delivered not through speeches, but through binge-worthy TV. And yet, this blending of history and politics came at a cost. Historians pointed out the inaccuracies, the romanticizing, the rewriting. Critics warned that entertainment was replacing fact. But for most viewers, that didn't matter. They weren't tuning in for a lecture. They were tuning in for a story, and stories are always more powerful than facts. So by the time we reached the mid-2010s, Ottoman dramas had become more than just shows. They were battlegrounds for identity. They were political symbols. They were international weapons of influence. And they proved that history, when told the right way, could move not just hearts but entire nations. And as we'll see in the next part, this global wave didn't just stop with Suleiman or Ertuğrul. The Ottoman TV empire was only getting started, and the fandom was about to explode in ways no one saw coming. What started as a Turkish television experiment, at first it was the Balkans. In Bosnia, Kosovo, and Albania, regions once ruled by the Ottomans, audiences were glued to their screens. They saw familiar names, familiar places, echoes of their own heritage. The shows were dubbed, subtitled, rebroadcast on prime time. Families would gather each night as if it were a ritual, not just to watch the drama, but to feel connected to a past they had grown up hearing about. Some watched with pride, others with skepticism, but everyone watched. Then came the Middle East. In countries like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates, the viewership skyrocketed. Streaming platforms carried the shows, and suddenly Ottoman history was back in Arab households, centuries after the empire itself had dissolved. Some loved the religious themes in Ertuğrul, the portrayal of faith as heroic, pure, unshakable. Others were fascinated by the politics, the betrayals, the lavish sets. The shows became conversation starters, wedding themes, even baby name inspiration. Actors who played heroes on screen were treated like real warriors off it. And then came the true surprise: Latin America. Mexico, Chile, Argentina, and beyond. Countries that had no direct link to the Ottoman Empire suddenly became obsessed. When Magnificent Century aired in Spanish, it was a phenomenon. People who had never even heard of Sultan Suleiman before were now debating his love life and palace intrigues as if they were following a local soap opera. Viewers would write emotional posts online, saying they had cried during Hürrem's downfall or cheered when Suleiman rode into battle. What's fascinating is how each region connected with the shows differently. In the Balkans, it was heritage. In the Middle East, it was faith and history. In Latin America, it was the melodrama, the romance, the grandeur. Everyone found something to grab onto. And then came Pakistan. If there's one country where Ottoman dramas reached god-level status, it was here. When Diriliş Ertuğrul was broadcast on national television with Urdu dubbing, it was like a cultural earthquake. Suddenly, Ertuğrul wasn't just a character. He was a hero, a role model, a symbol of Islamic valor. Kids dressed up as him. Mosques preached about his honor. Politicians endorsed the show. Prime Minister Imran Khan himself said that Pakistani families should watch it because of its moral lessons. It went beyond television. Pakistani fans started following Turkish actors on social media in massive numbers. Engin Altan Düzyatan, who played Ertuğrul, saw his Instagram explode with millions of new followers. When he posted pictures of himself, comments poured in from Karachi, Lahore, Islamabad. Fans wrote poetry for him. They painted murals of him. Some even started writing letters asking him to visit. And when he finally did, the streets erupted. Engin visited Pakistan in 2020, and the reception was like that of a rock star. He was invited by political leaders, showered with gifts, and mobbed by fans who treated him like a living legend. That wasn't just fandom. That was cultural diplomacy at work. Tourism followed. Turkish authorities noticed something interesting. More and more tourists were asking to visit filming locations of Ottoman shows. The village sets of Ertuğrul became tourist attractions. People from the Middle East and South Asia flocked to Turkey, not just to see Istanbul's mosques or Cappadocia's hot air balloons, but to walk where Ertuğrul had walked, to stand where Suleiman had ruled, at least according to television. Turkish tourism campaigns leaned into it, promoting Ottoman tours for international visitors. What Hollywood did for Los Angeles, Ottoman dramas were doing for Anatolia. And then came the fandom culture online. YouTube edits with millions of views, TikTok clips of sword fights set to epic music, Instagram fan pages dedicated to Hürrem Sultan or Ertuğrul Bey or Turgut Alp, cosplay conventions where kids dressed in leather armor, waving wooden swords. Even in countries where people didn't speak Turkish, fans memorized the lines, learned the theme songs, and quoted their favorite heroes. One of the strangest side effects was how actors became political figures by accident. When Halime Sultan's actress Ezra Bilgiç posted a modern fashion photo, some conservative fans from abroad criticized her, saying she should act like the character she played. Imagine that, people confusing a 21st century actress with a 13th century warrior's wife. That's how blurred the lines had become. It went even further. In some regions, clerics debated whether these shows were halal or haram to watch. Some praised them for showing Islamic values, others warned against idolizing fictional characters. Meanwhile, Netflix and other platforms noticed the trend and scrambled to add Ottoman dramas to their libraries. Everyone wanted in. This wasn't just fandom anymore. It was a global cultural wave. A Turkish series about a medieval tribal leader was somehow sparking debates in Pakistani mosques, trending hashtags in Argentina, and shaping tourism in Istanbul. It showed something powerful. The Ottoman Empire may have fallen in 1922, but its story was still alive, and people still wanted to feel a part of it. For millions around the world, the Ottomans weren't dusty figures in textbooks. They were flesh and blood heroes and villains, lovers and warriors, brought back to life on screen. And in that sense, these dramas didn't just retell history. They revived it. They made people care about the past again. And in doing so, they gave Turkey one of the strongest cultural exports of the 21st century. No empire ever ruled without opposition, and no cultural wave ever spread without backlash. Ottoman TV dramas were no exception. For every fan who adored them, there was a critic who dismissed them, a government that banned them, or a historian who rolled their eyes. The first criticisms came from Turkey itself. When Magnificent Century aired, it was immediately attacked by conservatives. Critics accused it of disrespecting the Ottomans, saying it reduced Sultan Suleiman, one of history's greatest rulers, into a man obsessed with women and palace drama. Why focus on his love life, they asked, instead of his military genius, his lawmaking, his empire building? Even President Erdogan, then Prime Minister, spoke out against the series, saying it distorted history and insulted the Ottoman legacy. In fact, some politicians threatened legal action against the producers. The outrage was so loud that security had to be increased at filming sites. But while conservatives saw the series as too scandalous, others argued the opposite, that shows like Ertuğrul were too pure, too idealized. Historians warned that portraying the Ottomans as flawless heroes created a fantasy history that didn't reflect reality. They argued that Ertuğrul was practically turned into a medieval superhero, complete with perfect morals, endless victories, and divine guidance. Was that entertainment or propaganda? This debate wasn't just Turkish. Abroad, the dramas sparked controversy everywhere they landed. In the Arab world, especially in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, the shows became political. Some clerics warned against them, claiming they were Turkish attempts at neo-Ottomanism, a way of reviving old loyalties to an empire that once ruled much of the Middle East. In Saudi Arabia, Magnificent Century was outright banned from television at one point. Egyptian TV authorities also cracked down, fearing the shows were shaping too much pro-Turkish sentiment in a region already politically sensitive. In the Balkans, reactions were mixed. Some viewers loved the nostalgia. Others, remembering the centuries of Ottoman domination, hated seeing their old rulers glorified on screen. Critics argued that the shows whitewashed oppression, slavery, and the struggles of local populations. For them, Ottoman dramas weren't just entertainment, they were salt in an old wound. Even in Latin America, where people had no direct link to Ottoman history, backlash came in stranger forms. Some Catholic groups criticized the shows for being too Islamic, while others simply mocked the over-the-top melodrama. But none of that stopped people from watching. In Pakistan, where Ertuğrul was celebrated like a national treasure, some cracks appeared too. Local actors and producers complained that the Turkish dramas were stealing attention from Pakistan's own television industry. Why pour money into homegrown stories, they asked, when everyone was busy watching imported ones? Pakistani celebrities publicly criticized fans for idolizing Turkish actors more than their own stars. The debate even reached Parliament, with politicians weighing in on whether the Ertuğrul craze was helping or hurting national culture. And then there was the international academic world. Historians across Europe and America often criticized these shows as blatant propaganda. They argued that Turkey was using pop culture to subtly spread its influence, promoting nationalism at home, soft power abroad, and reshaping the Ottoman image in the eyes of millions. What Hollywood did for American culture, Turkish dramas were now doing for Ottoman pride. The criticism grew sharper when Turkish politicians openly embraced the shows. Erdogan himself praised Ertuğrul for instilling national values. Pro-government media outlets encouraged people to watch, calling it a patriotic duty. This was more than television. It was cultural policy. Some saw it as harmless pride. Others saw it as dangerous myth-making. But perhaps the strangest controversies weren't political at all. They were personal. Take the actors. Ezra Bilgiç, who played Halime Sultan, posted modern modeling pictures on social media. Immediately, fans, especially in Pakistan, scolded her, saying she should behave like her character, modest and traditional. She had to publicly remind people that she was not Halime, just an actress. Engin Altan Düzyatan, meanwhile, faced rumors and fake news stories in South Asia, with wild claims about him converting religions, marrying local women, or making political statements he never made. The line between history, drama, and reality had blurred so much that people weren't sure where fiction ended and truth began. Yet for all the controversy, the shows didn't fade. If anything, the criticism fueled more curiosity. The bans in Saudi Arabia only made people find ways to watch online. The outrage in Turkey only drew more viewers to see what the fuss was about. Historians' complaints only made fans double down in defense. The more resistance the shows faced, the more unstoppable they seemed. It became clear. Ottoman dramas weren't just stories. They had become battlegrounds of culture, politics, and identity. They stirred debates about nationalism, religion, history, and modernity in ways few TV shows ever could. And while critics argued, fans kept watching. Because in the end, no matter how much controversy brewed around them, the stories of sultans, warriors, and dynasties were simply too addictive to resist. Why do millions of people sit through 2-hour-long episodes of Diriliş Ertuğrul without getting bored? Why did Magnificent Century glue entire families to their screens for years? Why did fans in Latin America stay up until 4 in the morning watching Turkish subtitles on bootleg sites just to keep up? It comes down to one thing: the Ottoman storytelling formula. First, let's talk pacing. Unlike the fast-cut editing of Hollywood, Ottoman dramas take their time. A conversation in Ertuğrul could last 15 minutes. A stare between Suleiman and Hürrem might stretch longer than an entire sitcom episode. At first, outsiders mocked this, but soon viewers realized something. The slow pacing felt immersive. It was like stepping into another time, another rhythm of life. Instead of rushing, you lived in the world of the story. Then there was the music. The soundtracks of these dramas weren't background noise. They were almost characters themselves. The swelling strings, the haunting ney flute, the pounding war drums. Each note pulled you deeper. Fans around the world downloaded the OSTs and played them on repeat, studying, cooking, or even falling asleep to them. The music made history feel alive, raw, and emotional. But the true secret wasn't just pacing or music. It was characters. Ottoman dramas mastered the art of building larger-than-life personalities who still felt human. Suleiman the Magnificent wasn't just a sultan. He was a husband, torn between duty and love. Ertuğrul wasn't just a warrior. He was a man constantly doubting, praying, questioning, yet never breaking. Hürrem Sultan wasn't just a scheming wife. She was a survivor, a foreign girl who clawed her way to power in a hostile palace. Every hero had flaws. Every villain had depth. And because of that, audiences connected. Viewers in Mexico, Indonesia, and Nigeria didn't care about Ottoman history. They cared about people. The universality of ambition, betrayal, loyalty, love, and loss transcended language and culture. Another key ingredient was the blend of fact and fiction. Ottoman dramas didn't chain themselves to dusty textbooks. They took real figures and historical events, but injected imagination into the gaps. Who knows exactly what Suleiman said to Hürrem on a quiet night? Nobody. But the writers invented it, giving history a beating heart. Was Ertuğrul really a legendary knight slaying Mongols left and right? Maybe not. But he became a symbol of faith and perseverance that resonated across continents. And then there was the moral clarity. In Western shows, heroes are often morally grey. In Ottoman dramas, the lines were sharper. Good versus evil wasn't blurred. Ertuğrul was always righteous, even when he suffered. His enemies were always treacherous, even when they seemed powerful. For audiences tired of cynical, morally confusing stories, this was refreshing. They wanted heroes who stood for something clear, something simple, something timeless. The costumes, the palaces, the tents, the battles, all of it added to the immersion. Viewers weren't just watching a show, they were escaping into another civilization, one that felt exotic yet strangely familiar. And finally, there was the emotional payoff. Ottoman dramas love the slow build, the endless tension, and then when the climax comes, it hits like a storm. A betrayal revealed, a sword unsheathed, a sultan's fury unleashed. These weren't just plot twists. They were emotional earthquakes, made all the more powerful by the hours of build-up. That's why these shows became addictive. They weren't quick thrills. They were long, slow feasts that left you full and craving more. But there's still another layer we need to explore. These dramas didn't just tell stories, they shaped identities. They made modern people reimagine the past, not as something dead and gone, but as something still alive in their veins. In the next part, we'll dive into how Ottoman dramas became more than entertainment, how they became tools of identity, pride, and cultural revival. When Diriliş Ertuğrul first aired, most people thought it was just another period drama, a medieval soap opera with swords, turbans, and lots of long speeches about honor. But within a few years, it became something far larger. It became a cultural movement. For many Turks, Ottoman dramas reignited pride in their own history. For decades, Turkey's identity was pulled between East and West, between tradition and modernization. The Ottoman Empire was often portrayed as a relic, something best left behind. But when people watched Ertuğrul riding across the plains, praying before battle, or Suleiman ruling with grandeur, suddenly the past didn't feel embarrassing. It felt glorious. Turks began to embrace their Ottoman roots with fresh eyes. Beyond Turkey and the Muslim world, the impact was even greater. Millions of viewers in Pakistan, Indonesia, Egypt, and the Gulf saw in Ertuğrul and Suleiman something they rarely saw in mainstream global media. Muslim heroes portrayed with dignity, power, and humanity. These weren't terrorists or side villains in someone else's story. They were leaders, visionaries, and warriors who carried entire civilizations. Social media exploded with fan pages. In Pakistan, people named their children after Ertuğrul. In the Middle East, Suleiman was once again called Kanuni, the lawgiver, and remembered with awe. In Bosnia and Albania, people connected the shows to their own Ottoman-influenced histories. For many, these dramas became a mirror, reflecting back a sense of pride and belonging. But it wasn't just Muslims. Even in Christian-majority countries, the shows found loyal fans. Viewers in Latin America, the Balkans, and Eastern Europe became obsessed with the drama, costumes, and larger-than-life conflicts. For them, it was less about faith and more about nostalgia, a chance to watch sweeping tales that felt like old epics, rather than the cynical modern shows they were used to. And here's the twist. Governments noticed. In Turkey, politicians embraced the success of Ottoman dramas as soft power. Suddenly, cultural exports weren't just pop songs or fashion brands, they were epic TV sagas that told the story of Ottoman greatness. Political leaders openly praised these shows, recognizing their ability to influence how Turkey was seen across the globe. But this came with controversy. Some historians argued that the shows twisted facts, glorified the past, and blurred the line between history and propaganda. Others accused them of fueling nationalism or religious revivalism. Yet none of that stopped audiences from watching. If anything, the debates made the dramas feel even more important, as if every episode carried not just entertainment value, but cultural weight. And then there were the symbols. Ertuğrul's sword became iconic. Suleiman's crown and robes inspired fashion lines. Even the prayer scenes, shown with lingering reverence, influenced viewers far outside Turkey. Suddenly, history wasn't just in books or museums. It was alive in living rooms, sparking conversations, pride, and sometimes even political movements. This transformation, from TV show to identity movement, is rare in modern entertainment. Few series in history have blurred the line between fiction and cultural memory so powerfully. Ottoman dramas didn't just tell stories. They reshaped how millions of people saw themselves. But there's still one more layer, because identity alone doesn't explain the global success. To truly understand why Ottoman dramas went viral across continents, we need to dig into the mechanics of globalization, streaming platforms, and the hidden marketing genius behind it all. If you go back just 20 years, it would have been almost impossible for a Turkish TV show to reach a global audience. Distribution was expensive, subtitles were a hassle, and Hollywood still dominated what most of the world saw on screen. But then came streaming. Netflix, YouTube, and regional platforms blew open the doors. Suddenly, dramas that once would have been confined to Turkish audiences had a highway to the rest of the planet. Take Diriliş, Ertuğrul. At first it wasn't even on Netflix. It spread through word-of-mouth, bootleg DVDs, and unofficial YouTube uploads. People in Pakistan and India were watching poor-quality, pixelated versions with fan-made subtitles, and yet the story was so powerful that nobody cared about the resolution. Families huddled around tiny screens, completely hooked. Then Netflix stepped in. They cleaned up the visuals, added professional subtitles and dubs, and suddenly Ertuğrul went from being an underground obsession to a mainstream phenomenon. In Latin America, where historical telenovelas already had a strong audience, it found a natural home. In Europe and the US, people curious about that Turkish Game of Thrones clicked out of curiosity and stayed for the drama. Meanwhile, Magnificent Century had already cracked open international markets. It aired in more than 70 countries, from the Balkans to South America. In fact, in some regions it became the most watched foreign drama of all time, outpacing even Korean and Mexican soap operas. At its peak, over 500 million people had seen at least part of it. That's not just popularity, that's empire building through television. But here's the wild part. The spread wasn't just driven by corporations, it was powered by fans. Viewers made TikToks of Ertuğrul's battle speeches. They uploaded fan edits of Suleiman and Hürrem's romance. They debated plot twists in Facebook groups with hundreds of thousands of members. The passion was grassroots and it created a self-sustaining cycle. The more people posted, the more others discovered it. And let's not forget the political backdrop. Around the same time these dramas went viral, there was a hunger in many parts of the world for alternatives to Hollywood's narratives. People were tired of seeing their own cultures ignored or misrepresented. Ottoman dramas stepped into that gap. They weren't just entertainment, they were representation. Add to that the timing of global events, rising interest in Islamic history, a renewed focus on East-West relations, and even global lockdowns during the pandemic, and you had the perfect storm. With people stuck at home and looking for new things to binge, suddenly Ertuğrul marathons became a family tradition, from Karachi to Cairo to Sao Paulo. And once that momentum built, the numbers became unstoppable. Turkish dramas are now the second most exported TV genre in the world after American shows. Think about that. A country of 85 million people is now competing with Hollywood on a global scale, simply by telling stories rooted in its own history. But here's the question. Was this just luck and timing? Or was there a deeper reason why Ottoman dramas resonated where others failed? If you strip away the costumes, the swords, and the palaces, what are these shows really about? At their core, they're about the oldest stories ever told, stories humans have passed down since we first sat around campfires. Take Ertuğrul. At one level, it's a Turkish historical drama, but at another, it's just the hero's journey, the same timeless pattern you'll find in the Odyssey, in Star Wars, in Black Panther. A humble warrior, guided by faith and vision, struggles against impossible odds, loses everything, rebuilds and rises as the chosen leader. That pattern hits something deep inside us. We want to see the underdog win because it mirrors our own struggles in life. Or look at Magnificent Century. Strip away the Ottoman setting, and it's the classic forbidden love and power struggle story. A woman rises from nothing, a foreign slave, to become the most powerful figure in the empire, shaping history from behind the curtains. That's not just Turkish history, That's every court intrigue story from Cleopatra to House of Cards. It's survival, ambition, and love all colliding. But here's the secret. Ottoman dramas don't just borrow these timeless story arcs. They amplify them with layers of culture, faith, and spectacle. For example, when Ertuğrul pauses mid-battle to pray, it's not just character development, it's a reminder of values, of grounding a hero in something bigger than himself. That adds a spiritual weight Western shows often lack. Then there's the family angle. These shows aren't just about kings and sultans. They're about mothers protecting children, brothers betraying each other, wives influencing husbands. No matter who you are, you can find a reflection of your own family drama in the Ottoman palace. That relatability makes the story personal. And of course there's the visual spectacle. Humans have always been drawn to grandeur, castles, armies, palaces, crowns. These dramas deliver that in spades. You're not just watching people talk in a living room, you're watching thrones being built, armies charging, crowns being fought over. The stakes always feel bigger, and that scale keeps people hooked. Now combine that with a few key modern storytelling tricks, like ending every episode on a cliffhanger. Will the Sultan survive the poisoning? Will the spy be exposed? Will Ertuğrul win the duel at dawn? And you've got the binge-watch formula perfected. But here's the really interesting part. While Western shows often glorify the individual, Ottoman dramas glorify the community and the legacy. Ertuğrul isn't fighting just for himself. He's fighting for his people, for the birth of a nation. Hürrem isn't just chasing power. She's shaping the destiny of her children and grandchildren. That collective vision resonates in cultures where family and community mean everything. And that's why these dramas didn't just entertain. They bonded audiences together. Families watched as a unit. Communities debated the morals. Entire nations took pride in the way their history was being dramatized. It wasn't just content, it was cultural glue. So while on the surface they look like flashy soap operas with swords, the secret is deeper. Ottoman dramas tapped into universal myths, but filtered them through the lens of faith, family, and identity. That combination is why they didn't just succeed, they exploded. As the story of the Ottomans winds its way toward a conclusion, it's impossible not to stand in awe of what they achieved. From humble beginnings as frontier warriors on the edge of a crumbling Byzantine world, they built a state that lasted for over 6 centuries. They ruled 3 continents, blended cultures, languages, and religions, and left behind mosques, palaces, and laws that still define entire nations today. But like every great empire before them, they too discovered that time does not forgive. Power is never permanent, and glory always fades. The Ottomans' biggest strength, their ability to adapt, to absorb, to endure, was also their greatest weakness in the end. They adapted so slowly to the modern age that when the Industrial Revolution roared across Europe, they could not keep pace. And yet their legacy is not one of defeat, but of influence. Coffee houses where revolutions were planned, Ottoman. The domes and minarets that define Istanbul's skyline, Ottoman. The legal systems in parts of Europe and the Middle East, Ottoman foundations. Even the foods we eat, baklava, kebabs, Turkish delight, carry their memory into our daily lives. The empire may have collapsed after the First World War, but in a strange way it never truly died. Its people live on, its culture flows across borders, and its history continues to fascinate millions. That's why the Ottomans are not just remembered as conquerors, but as shapers of civilizations. And that is what makes them so endlessly compelling. The empire that rose from nothing, ruled for centuries and then vanished, leaving behind echoes that still shape the world today. Thank you for watching this journey through the rise and fall of the Ottoman Empire. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe. We're trying to reach 1,000 subscribers before the end of the month, and with your support, we can keep creating more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. Because history isn't just about the past, it's about the forces that shape the world we live in right now.